There are very sacred places in downtown Tulsa. Alongside the office towers and parking garages are the city's oldest churches. Built during the oil boom, these holy places are architectural gems, some with designs that are recognized and admired worldwide, some with stunning stained glass, and others with remarkable religious relics. Tulsa's downtown churches and the people who care deeply about them. Holy Tulsa.
Tulsa has more churches downtown than any city its size. These places of worship are among the oldest and most significant structures in this region. Hello, I'm Glenda Sylvie.
And I'm Paul Sorrell. The churches also have very large congregations. In fact, it's estimated that 40,000 people attend church downtown. Some people even joke that downtown Tulsa is busier on Sunday than it is during the work week.
From the Tower of Boston Avenue to the crypt beneath Trinity Episcopal, Jack Frank now takes us on an unforgettable tour of these heavenly places in Holy Tulsa.
This modern-looking church is probably the city's most recognizable. With a striking tower that points towards heaven, Boston Avenue Methodist is an Art Deco masterpiece, as contemporary today as it was when it opened in 1929. Chris Kallenberger is one of Boston Avenue's many admirers.
A lot of Tulsa's most important architecture is what you would call in the Art Deco style, which was an architectural style that was popularized in the late 20s and through the 1930s, and was especially prevalent in Tulsa because that's when all the building and the oil money made Tulsa explode.
Boston Avenue Methodist was the very first church ever built with contemporary symbolism and design. Above the entrances are terracotta sculptures of some very important Methodist figures. The founder of Methodism, John Wesley, and on either side, his mother and his brother Charles.
Your eye is drawn immediately upward because of the way the architecture is formed and designed, and at the pinnacle of each point you have these very stylized praying hands, open praying hands. The tower, too, I think is in keeping with the sort of medieval history of church building, but very, very modern.
That graceful tower is 15 stories tall. On the top floor is a chapel that opened in the 1960s. These news pictures were taken the eventful day when the chapel was completed. Today you have to walk to get up to the tower. Roger Coffey is a longtime member.
It was designed to be a 20th century church, and a very different concept in church building, and something that took this congregation a long time in the planning stages to accept and make sure this is really the way we want to go. This is what we want to do. But once they were sold on it, they never backed down. So the story of the building of the church is really a story of a lot of stick-to-itness.
There is a big debate over who gets credit for this glorious building. A Central High School art teacher, Ada Robinson, was hired to do the design. But Miss Bobby, as they called her, lacked architectural background. So one of her former students, architect Bruce Goff, was brought in to make a building out of her drawings. Some say Goff was the genius behind Boston Avenue. Others disagree.
But we basically feel the design was Ada's, that she did the design sketches, and those went from her to Bruce Goff, and he took those sketches and translated them into architectural drawings.
Even though Boston Avenue's round sanctuary has no center aisle, it's still one of the most popular places in the city for weddings. The inside of the church is as contemporary as the outside. Another longtime member, Sherry Goodwin.
It strikes you when you first walk in, but the tiny, minute details, even down to the carvings around the altar table, the communion table, there's just so much there. I think that's why this particular church building is so well known, because of the Art Deco. It's a really outstanding example.
Presbyterians were the first denomination to set up a church in Tulsa. They originally met in a school building at 4th and Boston. Among the founding fathers of the church were J.M. Hall, one of Tulsa's first merchants, and the town's first postmaster, Josiah Perryman. As membership grew, Presbyterians kept building new churches to accommodate everyone. Betty Payne joined the church as a little girl in 1917.
You see, Tulsa was just a little bitty town at that time, and then with oil play being discovered down at Glen Pool, that's when people like us came from Pennsylvania. There was a great influx, and we were Presbyterians, all of us.
The Presbyterians settled into a permanent location at 7th and Boston, building a giant Gothic structure. One of the fascinating features of this church is a wrought iron cross that appears to float at the front of the sanctuary.
It's a see-through cross. It's when you walk right straight back behind it, and you can see through it the way it's constructed to the figure of Christ in the window there. So this becomes rather distinctive part of the church.
The pipe organ is a treasured part of First Presbyterian. It's the largest in the state, with 6,520 pipes. Ron Pearson is organist.
It was installed in 1967 and 68. It took about 3 months to actually assemble the pieces, and then another 2 or 3 months to do what is called the tonal finishing, which is regulating each pipe one at a time to achieve the proper pitch and proper volume and so on. An organ of 6,000 pipes is not twice as loud as one of 3,000, but what you can do is achieve much more variety.
The square building with the round top at 11th and Boulder is the Church of Christ Scientist. It's been here since 1923 and is a combination of two architectural styles. The columns are Greek. The dome is Roman. Inside the church, an old stairway leads up into the dome. Mark Childers likes exploring here.
Watch your head. I can't seem to get too many people up here. But I think it should be a must for anybody that joins the church. They should be able to come up and see what it's all about up here and see how it's built. It's a wonderful thing.
Rather than climbing around in the attic, most people would prefer this view of the dome. From the auditorium, where natural light brings out rich colors. 20 years after the congregation built this church, they hired Dr. Ada Robinson to redecorate it from top to bottom. Bob and Dorothy Hall remember Ada's hard work.
I think it's so interesting, that design that she made, because the dome was just plain until Miss Robinson went up there and put that design in. And the painters just didn't get the idea of what she was doing. So that's why she had to crawl up there and actually painted 2 or 3 of the panels so that they would get the idea of what she was doing.
She was a very lovely person and very artistic, and knew what she was doing and did a good job.
The congregation is especially proud of the pipe organ. It's been here as long as the building has. They believe it's the oldest church pipe organ still operating in the state.
And when we added on to the instrument in 1986, we added a new console because the wiring over the years had gotten brittle. We also added more of the more recent sounds that are used in church music today. Therefore, you have this wonderful little pipe organ.
the street from Christ Scientist are some more exotic domes. They sit atop First Christian Church. The building looks very powerful because of its Greek design and its Corinthian pillars. The large green dome covers an extraordinary stained glass dome in the center of the sanctuary.
The dome of this sanctuary is one of the really classic domes in the whole country. It was built, I think, for a cost maybe of, I don't know the original cost, but it's worth over $1 million now, and it's really a beautiful piece.
In the days before air conditioning, the glass dome would be lifted up by pulleys to let fresh air in. The breeze would keep the congregations cool on those hot Oklahoma Sundays. Speaking of the old days, First Christian used to have the largest Sunday school attendance of any church in the city. As many as 4,000 would show up for classes.
There was just a big push for Sunday school attendance during that period, and of course it was before television and Sunday sports and all of those things, so that coming to church was really, one of the big activities of the week. But this church has always had a very strong Sunday school.
The early members of First Christian Church were people who came to northeastern Oklahoma from other parts of the country. It was important to them to have a marvelous building in which to worship. First Christian member Joan Hogger.
Well, someone said to me not long ago that we don't build churches anymore. We're building football stadiums and entertainment palaces. But I think that having the beautiful churches that we have in downtown Tulsa shows that our priorities were straight, that we did build things of importance first.
Across the street from First Christian Church is the tallest perpendicular Gothic structure west of the Mississippi. Tulsans know it as First United Methodist Church. Early days at this church were not very glamorous. The congregation worshipped in a basement for years as money was raised to finish the sanctuary. When it was completed, Tulsans were awed by its size and beauty.
People couldn't imagine anybody building a church this big. In fact, they didn't plan to build it this big at the beginning. They hired an expert, Dr. Skinner, who came in to build the church, the preacher. And the original plans were to have a dome at the top, sort of like First Church of Christ Science and Christian Church. And he talked them into enlarging and switching from that to Gothic.
Arches are a very important feature of this church. They lift the eye towards heaven.
There are arches everywhere throughout the sanctuary. And as you walk into the main part of the sanctuary, you go through an arch and look at a gigantic arch at the east end of the building where a great, beautiful stained glass window shows the picture of Christ the King, worshipped by 7 angels holding 7 candlesticks. The leaded stained glass windows are, of course, beautiful, but it all worked together to create an atmosphere in which the worship of God is easy. You can almost hear the voice of God in your inner ear saying, "Be still and know that I am God," when you walk in here.
There are some other treasures at First United Methodist. The church library contains 15,000 religious and spiritual volumes, some so priceless they're locked away in a cabinet.
And it's organized as well as any city library ever was, because city librarians have worked in here for years. I doubt if any church religious library can compare to this in the whole town.
Tulsa's oldest Episcopal church is Trinity at 5th and Cincinnati. From above the building, it becomes clear that Trinity is laid out in the shape of a cross. This Gothic structure is one of Tulsa's holy treasures. Church member Martha Cole.
Dr. Edward Henry Eckel, who was the rector here for 28 years, said that he was quite positive that this is the best example of Gothic architecture, not the largest, but he thinks the most authentic between St. Louis and the West Coast.
Tulsans have been coming to this corner to worship since 1906. Before that, the property was an apple orchard, which the Episcopalians bought for $800. Trinity's Gothic sanctuary is surrounded by brilliant stained glass. Each window depicts a different part of the Apostles' Creed.
It begins, of course, with the phrase, I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, continues around, and in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord.
There is one highly unusual, rather eerie window at Trinity. The Heaven and Hell window, as it's called, contains the likeness of evils.
There's a section that has Adolf Hitler, a very recognizable likeness, Mussolini in his iron helmet, Hitler's henchmen, Goering and Goebbels, one of them with the swastika on his helmet. And there are other, and somebody, of course, lots of people didn't understand that at first. But when you know that the two men who were responsible for designing the windows both served in World War II and were well aware of the Holocaust and all the horrors of that particular time in history, they consider that to be hell in our time.
Downstairs, Trinity Episcopal has a crypt, or a columbarium, containing ashes of the dead.
It's a very ancient tradition. For those of us who have visited in England and Europe and gone through cathedrals there, for years, centuries really, people have been buried within the confines or the precincts of the church. And this particular columbarium was built in the 1960s, late 60s, and at that time, we understand that it was the first in the state of Oklahoma. And this is for not only members of Trinity, but friends.
When Catholics dedicated Holy Family Cathedral in 1914, it was taller than any building in the state. And some say back then the three spires were visible from as far away as the Glenpool oil fields, west of town. Holy Family is now dwarfed by modern office towers, but it still looks pretty much the same as it did in 1914. But there is a difference in how the clocks and the bells work. In the early days, men had to climb ladders into the tower to set and wind the clocks, and bells had to be rung manually. Today, the chimes and clocks are electrical. The altar of Holy Family is an original part of this structure. It's one of the largest Gothic altars in the nation. The altar looks like marble, but it's made of a less expensive material, marble dust and gypsum. It was crafted in Italy and shipped here in pieces. It's a beloved part of this building. Father James White.
It's basically North Italian Renaissance in its configuration. It has a scene of the crucifixion surrounded by angels and the statues of the evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. In the front of the altar is a scene of Da Vinci's Last Supper.
Light pours into Holy Family through 160 stained glass windows shaped in the style of the Gothic arch. They depict Christ, the saints, and apostles.
Well, the two big windows. We have Christmas on this side and Easter over here. We have the 12 apostles up in the apse of the church. We have various other saints in the clerestory, scenes from the life of Christ in the major windows along the aisles. And in the choir loft, we have patron saints of music. It's a nice, comfortable old building. We don't attach any great architectural significance to it. It has nice pointed arches and people like to get married here. So it's a kind of a friendly building that way, not terribly austere.
North of downtown in historical Greenwood is a church that has bounced back from ruins. Vernon AME, which stands for African Methodist Episcopal, began in 1907. The church was one of many buildings burned by whites in Tulsa's infamous race riot of 1921. This newsreel footage shows the widespread damage inflicted upon the Greenwood district. Following the riot, it took years to raise money to rebuild the sanctuary. Bob Fairchild recalls how the congregation never gave up.
I never did give up the idea that we would have church again because we had such outstanding leadership at that time. We don't have it now like we had at that time. The leadership that we used to have was forthright and aggressive and who loved the church.
This church was home to one of the city's most important civil rights leaders, the late Ben Hill, pastored at Vernon AME for nearly 20 years.
But as far as the civil rights movement is concerned, the black Muslims...
He was known for his tireless crusade against racism. His widow, Fannie Hill, is still active here.
He was blessed. I think God gave him the gift to express himself. He had a vocabulary like a dictionary to me. I didn't ever have to use one. He could say what he wanted to say in the words that he wanted to say them. Sometimes they were hard, sometimes they were not. But he just believed that all mankind should be the same.
Our Heavenly Father.
Today, Vernon AME is struggling. Membership is in decline. It's difficult just maintaining the church.
It's a pretty tough struggle we have, and we've lost lots of members by death. Just one thing after another, but in spite of it all, we're still going. Long ago, Tulsa Baptist attended church in a modest building at 4th and Cincinnati. As the city's population grew, so did the church. Somebody took a lot of home movies through the years documenting the many construction projects at First Baptist. Today, First Baptist takes up an entire block along Cincinnati. Places that once stood here, like the Wells Hotel and even a tavern, have long since been replaced by church buildings.
There was a bar, which had a very illustrious history. The young people would meet over there for Bible study in different organizations in rooms where there were still bullet holes in the walls from the ruckus that had been created over there. The church tore that one down and eventually in 1972 built our gymnasium, our Christian Life Center, on that location.
This is the only downtown church with its own gym. And basketball is one way First Baptist reaches out to families and kids. In the early days of television, Channel 6 would often broadcast Sunday services from First Baptist. The church has changed a lot since then. The sanctuary is much more modern.
The building at that time would actually seat about 2,200 people. It only seats about 1,600 now, and for several reasons. For one, with our technology, we've had to take over seating areas for sound booths and radio control booths and so forth. People will not tolerate the space that was allotted to them in the 20s and the 30s. Today they expect more, and they simply won't come if you cram them in as closely as we once did.
The churches of downtown are truly remarkable. Tulsa is very fortunate they've endured through time.
And they haven't stopped growing either. The churches keep adding on to their original buildings to accommodate the needs of their congregations.
We hope you've enjoyed these very sacred places. We've certainly enjoyed bringing them to you.
Good night.